The daughter of King Rome of Hyrule, Zelda.
What an unexpected answer. We are the king and queen who founded Hyrule, after all. Or at least we were the last time I checked. At least we were the last time I checked. At least we were the last time I checked. At least we were the last time I checked.
The history of Tears of the Kingdom is currently a topic of heavy debate within the Zelda community. Rauru said he founded the Kingdom of Hyrule, as far as he and Sonia are aware, and this last little shred of uncertainty in the king's voice holds an important caveat. My challenge to this assertion would be, was this really the first time ever that the Kingdom of Hyrule was founded? Because we've found a lot of proof that says the contrary. I'm joined by Thinking at Max Volume to disprove this claim.
If you've played Tears of the Kingdom and watched all the memories presented, you probably assume Rauru is talking about events taking place after Skyward Sword. But if you look at the entire Legend of Zelda series, the evidence actually leans more towards Rauru's Hyrule Kingdom not being the first.
Max Volume and I both believe that the history of Tears of the Kingdom happens after a merging of timelines has already occurred, long after the events of every Zelda game, but before Breath of the Wild. So our collective theory operates under this assumption. By providing canon evidence and logic, Rauru's Hyrule Kingdom should have started after the timelines did a fuse spell, which we both explain in these respective videos. So if you haven't seen those already, check them out for a better idea of what we'll be presenting today. And it's important to note that while we don't like the idea of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom completely rebooting the Zelda series, we are certainly biased in how we appreciate the congruence of this theory. Because this theory, which places a merging of all previous timelines long before Breath of the Wild, doesn't exclusively reboot the Zelda series that people have had fond memories of for almost 40 years now. Instead, our theory asserts that these two games press the reset button on the franchise, while not sacrificing the history of every Zelda game before them. At the very least, I'm sure you can relate to that, because as a fan of the series for 25 years now, I can relate to that. You don't want to be told that your favorite Zelda game is just a fable. You don't want to be told that the favorite Zelda game you loved playing as a child didn't happen. Because we, sure as Sheikah, don't want that either. Alright, before Uncle Wiz goes further along on his tangent, let's begin. Outside of timeline logic, here is why Tears of the Kingdom's history can't take place after Skyward Sword and before Minish Cap. So look, I know I'm beating a dead horse when I say that Hyrule's history doesn't repeat itself. I mean, it does repeat, but it doesn't repeat in the exact same manner. Instead, Hyrule's history rhymes. Similar locations appear in each game. Similar sequences of events happen, but they aren't exact repetitions. I'll give you a good example here. This Temple of Time is not this Temple of Time. The Temple of Time in Skyward Sword is located in the Lanayru Desert from a civilization that existed during the era of Hylia, whereas the Temple of Time we know and love from the N64 era was said to have been built upon the sealed grounds from Skyward Sword and established by this Rauru, a Hylian who created the Light Temple and the only entrance to the Sacred Realm ever. Even the Temple of Time from Twilight Princess operates differently, as the Oko played a role in its construction, with this temple housing the Dominion Rod in addition to being used by the Oko and the Hylians. These differences will lead us to a question that will be answered further down the road. What you need to know is that these temples are the same in name only. Furthermore, they are indicative of several iterations of separate but equal kingdoms of Hyrule to which they belong, which is an important distinction to make. Same land of Hyrule, different Hyrule kingdoms.
The point that we're trying to hammer into your heads right now is that the Kingdom of Hyrule follows a cycle of prosperity and decline, as mentioned in the previous sources like Hyrule Historia and Masterworks. The kingdom prospers, but is then besieged by evil. Rinse and repeat. Similar things happen, but the events are not the exact same. We have the ancient robots, who demonstrated their advanced technology, but sometime long before the present-day events of Skyward Sword, their society collapsed, and they all rusted away. These robots belong to an ancient civilization, and these ancient people were up against the likes of technologically advanced bokoblins, but even those monsters devolved into a more tribal state. This advanced civilization even had its own Temple of Time, located in the desolate Lanayru Desert of Skyward Sword's present. The descendants of the people of Skyloft eventually established the Kingdom of Hyrule and entered the Era of Prosperity, but this era ended with the arrival of evil. This evil was only defeated with the help of the Picori and their gift of the Picori Blade. Having sealed the evil away, the kingdom entered a time of peace, until Vaati the Sorcerer unleashed that evil, and the events of Minish Cap play out. Vaati is defeated, and he himself is sealed within the Four Sword, leading to another peaceful time for Hyrule.
Before the events of Ocarina of Time, Hyrule had entered into a fierce war that spanned countless eras. This war is commonly known as the Hyrulean Civil War, or at least that's its popular nickname. The kingdom was in decline until the Gerudo, led by Ganondorf Dragmire, once again swore fealty to the king of Hyrule. The kingdom experienced a brief period of peacetime until Ganondorf gained access to the Sacred Realm, casting Hyrule into ruin yet again. And we know what happened next. Link and Zelda defeated Ganon, and sealed him away in the Sacred Realm. After Ganon's defeat, Hyrule was doing pretty well, minus the fact that the person who saved the kingdom, the Hero of Time, left the timeline and never returned. When Ganon eventually escaped his seal within the Sacred Realm, he didn't have a reincarnation of the Hero of Time to face him. The kingdom was flooded by the gods as a result. Yeah, the world of the Great Sea looks cheerful as all heck, but there's no mincing words when I say that this flooded Hyrule is post-apocalyptic, as noted by the demons frozen in time inside the castle below the flooded kingdom. There's a reason that Outset Island, the island Link grew up on, has a tradition of boys wearing green tunics. The Hero of Time pulled the equivalent of leaving for a pack of cigarettes and never coming back, and these poor boys are trying to emulate who he was, minus the abandonment. Taking this even further, in Spirit Tracks, Link and Tetra go on to establish the new Kingdom of Hyrule, within the Land of Spirits and Good. This kingdom even establishes its own crest, symbolizing its progenitors, the pirate crew which Tetra led when they first arrived at the Land of Spirits and Good. This new Kingdom of Hyrule also has a history of its own cycle of prosperity and decline, having to deal with its own unique cycle with the Demon King Malladus. What's important to note about the new Kingdom of Hyrule is that it establishes an explicit precedent of Hyrule Kingdom falling, only to be later reformed as a new kingdom. And in the case of Spirit Tracks, we could easily say that this new Kingdom of Hyrule was founded for the quote-unquote first time, despite that being conflicting with the truth of the matter.
Meanwhile, in the Downfall timeline, Ganon, having defeated the Hero of Time and acquiring the complete Triforce, put the kingdom in dire straits. The sages tried one last Hail Mary and sealed Ganon and the Triforce in the Sacred Realm. Peace returned to the kingdom, but rumors spread of the lost power of the gods, and conflict arose once again for access to the Triforce. But dudes kept going into the Sacred Realm, never to return. They didn't realize Ganon had warped the Sacred Realm into a dark world filled with peril. During this time, the kingdom fell into ruin, and the power of the royal bloodline weakened. This war ended once the sages closed off the Sacred Realm, and peace returned. That wasn't until Aghanim, the Dark Wizard, took control of the kingdom by force, igniting the events of A Link to the Past. Ganon was eventually killed, and the kingdom was saved. With the complete Triforce in its possession, the kingdom prospered once again, and this became known as the Golden Era. The era of decline begins with feuding in the royal family, which results in the separation of the Triforce. This leads to the kingdom weakening and becoming an easy target for Demon King Ganon, who steals the Triforce of power. The kingdom comes within inches of destruction, but is saved by Link of that era. Unfortunately, during the rebuilding efforts that occur after the first Legend of Zelda game, Ganon's minions attack and destroy the kingdom for good in an effort to resurrect their Dark Lord. Even in Breath of the Wild, we learn that the kingdom fell when Calamity Ganon returned. We see the environmental storytelling, showing us how everything was almost wiped out by the corrupted Sheikah Guardians, and how even though the monarchy was destroyed, society continues in small outlier villages. Breath of the Wild itself is a post-apocalyptic game. As you can see, during the entire history of the series, the land of Hyrule experiences periods of peace and growth, followed by periods of darkness and destruction. In 2 of the 3 split timelines, Hyrule Kingdom is destroyed. Based on what we know, it's not too outlandish to think that Zonai Rauru could have just re-established the Kingdom of Hyrule, while not realizing that there were previous kingdoms, plural, of Hyrule before his kingdom. But then you might ask why Rauru thinks that his Hyrule Kingdom is the first. Well, let's look at the Hylian citizens we see in the Memories of Tears of the Kingdom. These Hylians are more primitive than the Skyloftians, almost tribal looking. They have simple weapons like spears, they're covered in symbolic tattoos, and they don't even wear armor outside of their Aztec motif helmets. They wear simple clothes like togas. The Skyloftians, on the other hand, have a military. They have advanced metallurgy skills, and they write books. They're also capable of making chainmail and more advanced weapons like swords and the Grusinator.
Just flip the switch.
Nintendo hire us.
When they descended to the land below from Skyloft, they wouldn't just give up all of this technology. If Rauru's kingdom started after Skyward Sword, then these are the type of citizens the Zonai would find, not the more simplistic Hylians we see in Tears of the Kingdom. But these simpler Hylians would make more sense if there had been a total societal collapse, say after Hyrule Kingdom had been destroyed and rebuilt a few times. At the end of 2 of the 3 timelines, we see the destruction of Hyrule, so this wouldn't be illogical to infer.
In addition to this, the royal family of Hyrule has always had a tradition of naming the women in their bloodline with powerful magic abilities Zelda. For almost the entirety of the series, we see this tradition carried from the Minish Cap onward. This tradition did not originate from Zelda traveling to the past in Tears of the Kingdom. This tradition begins with the Zelda of Skyward Sword descending into the land of Hylia and continuing her bloodline. The royal family remembers the legend of Zelda from Skyward Sword, and so they honor her by giving their princesses this name. The Skyloftians were simple people, but not simple enough to just up and forget the first chronological Zelda, nor the naming conventions surrounding her descendants. Like Max Volume said, the Skyloftians had books, yet Sonia and Rauru don't even recognize Zelda's name when she first meets them. We can explain this lack of recognition for her name with the societal collapse long after a merging of the previous timelines. We have a harder time explaining this ignorance if the last known demographic of Hylians before Minish Cap, the Skyloftians, who have an established pattern of recording their history, Beetle's operating a f***ing airship here, just suddenly lost the name of their most important matriarch to date at this point in time.
In his last video, Wiz provided evidence showing how Rauru proved that he was not all-knowing. He did this by saying that keeping a watchful eye on Ganondorf could keep our villain under his control. And what did Ganondorf do? He killed Queen Sonia and took control of her secret stone, transforming him into the Demon King. The second time Rauru got it wrong was when he said Zelda was from a future where she never went back in time. But Corpsedorf proved this to be wrong faster than Discount Cass can say "Zappo!" when he realized who Zelda was upon his revival at the beginning of the game. Rauru isn't always right, so we are inferring that he's also not right about being the first founder of Hyrule Kingdom. Let me give you a historically accurate example of people getting things wrong. Who was the first European to set foot on the Americas? And by the Americas, I mean the Western Hemisphere. Gotta be Christopher Columbus, right? In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Obviously, it's Columbus. I mean, that's wrong. Columbus didn't discover America first, but that's what the world believed for the longest time. In the 1960s, on the eastern coast of Canada, the remains of a settlement that was later named Los Olmedo were found. A settlement featuring the remains of a Nordic longhouse. Traders from Greenland had settled on the shores of North America and established a small settlement, which scientists carbon dated to around the year 1000 AD, almost 500 years before Columbus. Stories were told of this founding, mainly the saga of Eric the Red and the saga of the Greenlanders, but that's all they were treated as. Stories. It wasn't until the 1960s when people discovered the truth that Columbus was never the first European to step foot on the Americas. And if you believe the details of these stories, it was actually Leif Erikson. It's not crazy to think that when the Zonai descended and saw the people of Hyrule in a more primitive state, they believed there had been no previous kingdoms or advanced societies. We know these tribes remembered the stories of previous heroes and events, so they may have even had legends or myths of an old Hyrule kingdom. But just like Columbus and the majority of Europe, the Zonai treated those stories as just stories. This brings us to a big question that we alluded to earlier. If Rauru is the founder of Hyrule Kingdom, then why are there two temples of time built in close chronological proximity to each other? Let's go to the official timeline and see when the first Hyrule Kingdom was established. Hyrule Historia page 77 tells us this. After Skyward Sword, the land becomes known as Hyrule, home of the Hylians. After an era of peace, war breaks out, caused by legends of the Triforce. The Rauru we see in Ocarina of Time, along with the other sages, build the Temple of Time, and the Master Sword acts as the key to the only entrance to the Sacred Realm, where the Triforce is hidden. Rauru becomes its guardian. It's only after this that Hyrule Kingdom is established by descendants of Zelda from Skyward Sword. Hyrule Castle is built next to this Temple of Time, and Castle Town follows. You can't put the past of Tears of the Kingdom here, and that's because of two big problems. The Temple of Time in Ocarina is where the entrance to the Sacred Realm is, which means if Tears Rauru founded the first Hyrule, then the Castle Town Temple would have to exist before, because that's what Historia says happened first. We don't have this temple though, and even if you say, maybe we do but we don't see it, probably not, because there's already the Sky Temple of Time. Why would Rauru make two different temples of time if he'd already built the one we see in Ocarina? There's also a problem if you think the Temple of Time ruins we see in Breath of the Wild are the same as the temple in Ocarina, because the ruins are eventually located in the same spot as the Sky Temple of Time. If you think it's the Ocarina Temple, then that would mean it was built after Hyrule Kingdom was established, and after Rauru had sacrificed himself to seal Ganondorf, directly contradicting what Historia tells us. It's also missing its Master Sword pedestal chamber, and there's no architectural indication of that chamber ever existing adjacently to this structure. Also note, the Sacred Grove Temple of Time in Twilight Princess is already falling apart. If you believe it's the same as the Ocarina Temple, then it's very unlikely that these ruins would have lasted tens of thousands of years until the time of Breath of the Wild.
There's also the problem of this guy, saying that he built the Temple of Time. If this is true, one of two statements must also be true. The first would be that Zonai Rauru built his Temple of Time. That temple goes up into the sky sometime after Zelda goes full dragon, and then some Hylian named Rauru built a second Temple of Time on the ground with a gate to the Sacred Realm locked exclusively by the Master Sword. The second statement would be that all of the first statement happened, but these two Raurus, the Zonai and the Hylian Rauru, are the same individual who built two different Temples of Time. One before he died sealing Demisdorf, and another he built as a Zonai spirit moonlighting as a Hylian sage. TLDR, it's a dumpster fire mess. Hyrule Historia said that Rauru's Temple of Time was built and the Sacred Realm was sealed before Hyrule Kingdom was established. That doesn't happen without a Master Sword being present, and it also doesn't happen if this guy doesn't know what the heck a Master Sword is. The Temple of Time in the Sky also doesn't have a pedestal for the Master Sword, nor is it the one that was used by the Hero of Time. Instead, it has an altar that the Master Sword uses to travel back in time, so that Zelda can heal it with her draconification.
Another problem is that if you say the past of Tears of the Kingdom is before the Sacred Realm is sealed, there are other issues. If Ganondorf attacked the kingdom, then why wouldn't Rauru go grab the Master Sword from the sealed temple? We know it's there after the events of Skyward Sword, but the blade is used when Hylian Rauru closes the door to the Sacred Realm. There's also the problem of no one knowing about the Triforce, even though knowledge of the Triforce is what caused war to break out during this time period in the first place. There's no way Ganondorf wouldn't know about the Triforce if this were true. He only knows about the Secret Stones, and this is his entire reason for feigning fealty in Tears of the Kingdom. As you can see, the past of Tears of the Kingdom actually causes a lot of lore inconsistencies, and to make it fit after Skyward Sword and before Minish Cap, you have to do a fair bit of retconning. But placing it after a timeline merger surprisingly fits better and requires little to no retcons. Hyrule's in a bad state before the Zonai. If you look at the Hylians, they have very obviously declined into a more primitive state compared to Hylians we've seen in other games. We also have 2 out of 3 timelines where Hyrule Kingdom falls, once in the adult timeline with Wind Waker, and another in the Downfall timeline between Zelda 1 and the Adventure of Link. We also see it's possible for Hyrule Kingdom to be destroyed and restarted like we do in Spirit Tracks with the creation of New Hyrule. We would like to suggest, based on this evidence, that after the timeline merger, the old kingdom did not survive. Which again, 2 out of 3 timelines have no Hyrule Kingdom. New Hyrule is not the same, it's an entirely different kingdom on a different continent. There's a bigger chance of the kingdom falling than the kingdom surviving this merger. And with a total societal collapse, the Hylians of Hyrule descended into the tribal culture we see in Tears of the Kingdom. And this is what the Zonai would see when they arrive from the sky.
This brings up an interesting question that challenges our positioning of Tears of the Kingdom's history. How can Sonia, who has trained powers of time magic, be weaker than Zelda, who has untrained time magic that is stronger? This can be explained with both timeline placements, but it can be better explained if we position Tears of the Kingdom's past before Breath of the Wild. Hyrule Historia states that the bloodline of the Hylians weakened with ages, following the wake of the imprisoning war. So their bloodline, their connection to the goddess Hylia, and by association, the powers that come with that relationship, lost their previous strength. What if, in addition to experiencing yet another collapse of society, as Hyrule Kingdom has a penchant for doing, the Zonai descended from the heavens to both re-establish order and reinvigorate the bloodline of the descendants of Hylia? This is a more plausible explanation for why Princess Zelda has stronger powers thousands of years in the future from Tears of the Kingdom's past, as opposed to Sonia being weaker than the Zelda from Skyward Sword. At most, and this is a ballpark estimation, 2 to 3 generations after the events of Skyward Sword. We want to hear your voice in the comments. If you liked what you saw, be sure to try force a click on those like and subscribe buttons. And be sure to check us out on Thinking at Max Volume's channel, where he has the complimentary video to this one explaining the other details that we found as to why Tears of the Kingdom's past can't happen before Minish Cap. This is Wiz. I'm gonna go catch some lightning. I'll see you in the next one.